Welcome to the Church Podcast, talking all things ministry so you can do church better. I'm your host, Christopher Wesley, and today's guest is Regina Boyd, and she's a mental health counselor with Boyd Counseling Services. You've maybe heard Regina before, on the Hallow app, but what I'm really excited about is her new book, Leaving Loneliness Behind. Actually, it's been out for a little bit, but I met Regina a couple months ago at RE Congress, and we were just sitting down talking about mental health issues, which I think is so essential to something that we're facing, not just in our communities, in our parish boundaries, but even for those of us who work in ministry. And that's some of what we talk about today in our conversation. So I'm really excited about sharing our conversation with you all. There's so much to jot down, and I hope you enjoy it just as much as I do. And of course, if you do enjoy the conversation, we ask that you leave a 5-star review or a like or whatever platform you're watching or listening this on, because again, the more we can get the word out there, the more we can help people do church better. But enough of my yapping. Without further delay, here is Regina.
Okay.
Regina, welcome to the Church Podcast. So glad you could join us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, Regina, I know we met a couple of months ago back at LA Congress, at RE Congress and everything, back in the Speaker's Lounge and everything. And I've gotten a chance to know you a little bit through reading your book and just a little bit about doing some research on your counseling service and everything like that. But for our guests and for me, would you mind just explaining a little bit about what you do and who you are and how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Regina Boyd. I'm a therapist. So I work in a private practice setting now where I do a lot of work with couples, families, individuals. So helping people from a wide range of concerns. So anything ranging from infidelity to just communication concerns, anxiety, depression, trauma, things like that. But I really love what I do. It's kind of a interesting story. I don't know, in the sense that I was always kind of the person on the playground that people would just open up to. So I have memories of playing at recess, and all of a sudden a friend is telling me about their parents getting divorced or something, and me really being taken aback. Like, I was not expecting to be shared that level of information. And so I guess I learned over time that I was a good listener. I'm the person on the airplane that people open up to without me trying or asking any questions. And so I learned that might have been a gift that I have. But I was always interested in psychology, went to college with the hope of pursuing being able to work together and journey alongside people in that clinical therapeutic way. And so I knew that was what I wanted to do by the time I got to college. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit, I guess, of a background and of how I ended up where I am.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And as someone who comes from a family of social workers and therapists and doctors and everything like that, I know there's just so many different types of healing that we need, whether, to some of the areas that you were mentioning, or just I forget who it was, but one way I heard it, and I really like this, is just as people have physical trainers to keep themselves physically in shape, sometimes we need therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychotherapists, whatever it might be, to help keep our minds in shape, because of whether it's the trauma we're going through or just to navigate through life a little bit stronger. And so really appreciative of the work that you did. And, again, we, for our listeners and watchers, we met at RE Congress, and I was there to speak about some stuff with my business, Marathon Youth Ministry. But you were there, talking about some of the work that you're doing, and also your book, Leaving Loneliness Behind, right? And so can you just share with us, how did the book come about? Is that something that was always on your heart to write? What was the story that you were hoping to tell? Because as someone who's written books, I know that it's a labor of love for sure. But there's always this message we want to get out. And while there's different ways of doing it, book writing is definitely a unique way of doing that. So I'll get quiet now and just hear your thoughts of how did that book come about?
Yeah, it's interesting because I will be honest, writing a book wasn't necessarily on my radar. Someone who worked at Ave Maria Press heard a talk that I gave, and they reached out and they said, "Hey, we really liked this topic. Have you ever thought about writing a book? Is this something you would be interested in?" And so that's really what got my brain working and thinking, well, yeah, I think you're right. I think that actually would be a good book. Obviously took some time to pray and discern and submitting my proposal for them to decide if they wanted to move forward and all of that. But it was really born out of this idea and this theme of emotional intimacy and connection and relationships. It's something I'm very passionate about and I really like talking about, but I feel like there's so much enhancement to our life when we can really get the most out of our relationships. And so as we were writing, it sort of morphed into from emotional intimacy into this theme of loneliness and how to avoid it, essentially. It's almost like a handbook um, of that, if you will. So yeah, I think getting a way for people to maximize their relationships, especially coming out of COVID, I think it's really important to revisit that as we're learning to re-engage, re-socialize, connect with one another again.
Yeah, and I can definitely appreciate that. And I have to say, one of the reasons why it struck me with all the coaching and consulting that I do in regards to Marathon Youth Ministry, one of the big things that I've seen as a reason why men and women burn out of ministry is because of loneliness.
Mm.
And it's an interesting sort of fact because whether you're introverted or extroverted, when you're in pastoral ministry in particular, whether it's youth ministry, children's ministry, or adult ministry, you're interacting with a lot of people, but it's easy to feel alone. It's easy to feel by yourself, especially when you're dealing with things of balancing this personal thing of your personal relationship with Jesus Christ and the professional aspect of it. How do we balance things between family life, right? Having our family involved in the ministry that we're doing, but also kind of guarding and creating boundaries along those lines. And then, again, you're interacting with hundreds, if not thousands of people every single year, different ages, different dynamics, but you can still feel alone. And one of the things that I really appreciate, and you kind of mentioned this just in what you were sharing, but also in the book, is that it's not so much being surrounded by people, but how much are we willing to get vulnerable and emotionally intimate with one another? And I think that's definitely key. And there was a quote well, there were several quotes in your book, but one in particular that really struck me, and I love this about vulnerability. And you wrote, "Without vulnerability, loneliness prevails and creates more separation and disconnect in our relationships. I may even go so far as to say that vulnerability is the ultimate difference between feeling lonely and feeling connected. It is quintessential, the linchpin, the single thread that ties and holds relationships together. It permeates every strong bond and connection." What I love about that is the fact that, getting vulnerable is challenging. It is difficult. So what are some of the things that you offer, whether it's through the book or even with your clients, to help them, embrace vulnerability, especially maybe in a workplace and also in a ministry setting, right? Where there are those dynamics of you want to be relational with people, but we still have to create some kind of boundaries in a way. So what are some suggestions or thoughts that you have that you would suggest to someone, especially someone working in ministry, to get vulnerable without necessarily, with the risk of getting hurt, but from there?
Right. Yeah. I think the professional context is trickier. There's a lot more nuances and things we have to be aware of to navigate. In general, I would say, just that found like that quote you read. I mean, it's really essential. And I like leading with that because I feel like it gives us some incentive to be willing to open up, be a little more vulnerable. So we believe in a God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He exists in a Trinity in relationship. And so when we're doing our relationships well, I believe, I'm not a theologian, but I believe we're more imaging God's likeness when we can do that really well. And so when you're thinking about being in a ministry context, it's all relational. If you want to do ministry well, you're developing true relationships, connections with people But I would also add that there is varying levels of vulnerability depending on the relationship. So if you think about all the tiers of a relationship, someone being a stranger, an acquaintance, a coworker, a friend, a best friend, a family member, a spouse, there are varying levels of degree of vulnerability that you have with each of those people. And so I would argue that if you're in a ministry setting, there's going to be somewhere where that falls on the spectrum of depth of a relationship and what things are appropriate to share vulnerability wise versus which aren't. So when you're thinking about that professional boundary, that's kind of what I would be considering is what areas am I finding to be comfortable and appropriate to share in this context and what aren't, and you can still do that while being very true and genuine in developing relationships and being very honest and present as well, right? You don't have to share about your marital problems with a high school teenager that you're having, but you certainly can share about how you can relate to maybe a friendship situation or something that's happened in your own past that you could share and give to that youth to help them through whatever challenge is happening for them.
Well, and so if I'm hearing you correctly, vulnerability isn't necessarily just dumping out everything about you, almost too much information. It's knowing what's appropriate in what circumstances, and especially with the age. Age is definitely a factor, right? If I'm a youth minister, what I'm sharing with teenagers is going to be totally different than what I share with their parents or what I share with my adult volunteers. But, some of the challenges too is the fact that and I'm sure you can more than relate to this as a therapist, that there are going to be people who are going to share with you a lot more than you need to or should share with them. And so how does that, unlike a friendship or a marriage or a family relationship where you kind of go deep both together, what are some tactics that people can use to, make sure that the other person feels like they can be vulnerable with them without necessarily expecting that you're going to share at the same level back to them?
Right. Of course, there's a sacrifice in being a ministry professional and being there to hold space for another person as they open up and share their pastoral concerns or whatever it may be. And part of that is making sure that you, as that catechetical leader, is getting that time to fill your own cup outside of the work environment. So again, how are your personal relationships? How are those? Are you able to get that outlet where you can share deeply and have somebody reciprocate that in a healthy way? Are you able to open up and process and learn about those things that are happening in your life? And when your cup is filled through prayer or whatever it may be, then you're able to hold space a little bit better for someone else. And as you're sort of pouring into someone else. So thinking about your own needs, whatever that is, for how you get re-energized, exercise, again, friends and quality time as well is a big one. And so I think that gives you the mental and emotional availability to just, again, be really present in the moment and be authentic in those moments as you're sort of receiving whatever that is that person is sharing with you.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the things that you shared with me back in LA is that you have done some work with men and women in ministry. I think you were mentioning some work with deacons. Is that correct? And and so what are some of the, and obviously realize you can't share details about any of that, which I'm not asking, but what are some of the, just being a woman of faith and, involved not just in therapy, but ministry as well. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in regards to loneliness in the church? What are some of the themes that you're hearing? Because we've talked about that with some of our previous guests as well, because as I mentioned, right, it's one of the reasons we're seeing some burnout with men and women in professional ministry. But what are some of the challenges that you're seeing and what do you think those stem from?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. I do think we help with loneliness in a lot of ways as a church. We visit the sick, we minister to people who are lonely. We offer Bible studies and small groups and all of these ways for other people to connect. But if you are in that leadership role as the deacon, as the ministry leader, the youth minister, whoever it is, there's a little bit of a difference in that you're not the one, you're facilitating the Bible study. You're not the one receiving from the Bible study or whatever it may be. And so certainly I think when we don't have healthy boundaries set up, in the workplace, which I think is a huge challenge in the church environment, because we want to be charitable with our time. We want to be open-armed and loving to so many people that we're serving, that it can be tricky to put, while we're putting others first, we're missing those signs internally that our minds, our hearts, and our bodies might be saying, hey, I need some time, I need a break. Please don't take on this extra task. You're already doing these 10 other ministries. Please don't take on this additional 11th one, just because somebody asked you to help with this or whatever that task is for the week. And so really we need to be paying attention more to those signs of how we can make sure that we're serving well and to the best of our ability. Because if we're burnt out, we're not really giving good ministry to the people that we care about in the first place, and why we're there in the first place as well.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a moment to break and talk about one of our sponsors, and that sponsor is Sacrilegious. I mean, do you feel holy? Maybe you don't. Do you look good? Maybe you don't. Well, Sacrilegious is the perfect combination of helping you feel holier and definitely making you feel good with their incredible t-shirts and sweatshirts and all sorts of awesome swag. Not only do they have t-shirts and sweatshirts, they also got great mugs. They have stickers. They have things for babies. And you can get custom orders through their company, 4 Marks Printing. In fact, check out CP Plus, for a little bit of a discount on that. But anyway, Sacrilegious. Head to sacrilegious.com. Check out all the awesome gear that they have. Start looking good, start looking holier, and start feeling better about yourself. All right, enough of that. Back to the show. Well, why do you think that is, though? Why do you think we struggle to kind of take that time for ourselves, right? This idea of a vacation or time off, It's like,
yeah. I don't know. There's a couple different reasons. I think there's, in general, in our culture in the United States, we really value work ethic. We have a tendency to push through in general. You are rewarded for showing up early, staying late, for just giving all you can. So there's that kind of secular model that we've been given and played to. But I think in the church, there's that added element of, again, being charitable and kind and serving the poor and the needy and really sacrificing. And so, again, if we're not aware internally, if we're not taking the time to do those mental health checkups, like you said, having that checkup for your brain, your mind, and your heart, you could be plowing through and not even aware that you're showing signs of burnout, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There can be signs that tell you along the way and in these different categories. So you might not even realize that that's something you should do. Mm-hmm. If that's not within your sphere, your social circle, that's something important that you've been exposed to. And then on top of that, I think there's probably many of us who just want to be accepted in one way, want to be praised. Maybe if you're a perfectionist, like I have been in many situations, you just kind of want that additional attaboy for doing something. And so there's lots of motivations and reasons of why we might go that extra mile, even when we shouldn't. And it's tricky because I don't want people to get the impression that I'm saying, don't serve, don't be selfless, don't sacrifice. That is not what I'm saying at all. It's, again, just paying attention to, is this a good time for you? If you need that extra, making sure you're going home at 5 every day instead of staying until 8. Are you just paying attention to how many hours you're giving, and do you need that refuel time?
Well, yeah, and I think that's important. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people who recognize those things when it's a little bit too late, right? Like usually we're like, when I'm burnt out, it's kind of not that you can't bounce back from that, but it's kind of far. So what are some like early warning signs or things that we can be aware of where we know it's not just a busy season, but it's actually part of something systemic or bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, in those categories, physically, am I exhausted? Do I have energy? Am I kind of dragging myself out of bed to get there? Or am I feeling really weighed down? Mentally, am I able to stay focused? Am I sharp, or am I foggy and not really concentrating as well as I normally do? Emotionally, am I happy to be there, or am I feeling like it's a lot? It's taking a drain out of me. Am I irritable, moody, just not my normal pleasant self. Something could be off there. Less patience, things like that are good signs. And then spiritually, is there some deep detachment within the work or apathy? Am I not feeling those spiritual? We don't have to have consolation all the time, but am I not really invested in the spiritual life of my own personal prayer, but also in the ministry? Is that a spiritual experience for me as well? Or is it, let's check all the boxes, which again, you're walking a very fine line because you're responsible for facilitating these events and there's some practical elements that need to happen. But are we able to draw spiritually even in that service element as well? So I think if you think about it in those categories, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, that can be a great way to just check in with yourself and say, how am I doing physically? Because you might have a lot of energy. You might have gotten great sleep one night. You might have been keeping up with your exercise, but emotionally you're in a bad mood and you're irritable and you're grumpy. And so there's ways to pay attention to that. Or you're emotionally great, but physically you don't have the energy that day. So that's a good way to tune in.
So a lot of times we'll just say, well, Regina, all I need is more coffee, right? I just need more coffee or maybe a kick of caffeine or something. What are some of the things and at what point should we be seeking professional guidance in those areas? It's like, how much of that can I fix on my own? And then, I know it's different for everyone, but at what point, should we be considering reaching out to someone, to a professional to get guidance through those different seasons?
If you have tried things on your own and you're still noticing a consistency in not feeling better, not able to focus, not being present, you just kind of can tell something's off and you're not at 100%. If you've already put things in place, you've read the books, you've done your own exercises, and it's still not seeing the results you want to see, that's a good sign that it's probably time to talk to somebody else about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing you mentioned in the book, and I've heard this several times, is you can't give what you don't have, right? You have to have that full cup to pour into people. And so I think it's really important, right, that we're, monitoring these signs, making sure that we can care for others and do that by taking care of ourselves. And as you mentioned, right, it's this fear sometimes of being selfish or, and you're not saying give up, serving others, but we have to be able to serve ourselves in order to help others as well. And that kind of brings me to, if we could kind of pivot a little bit, a few years ago, coming out of the pandemic, we started doing this thing at my parish where we would sit down with the teens and kind of do an anonymous poll of asking the question, what's the single biggest challenge that you're facing, in your community, in your schools, in your personal life? And it was about 2 years ago when young people in this survey pretty much unanimously said that the thing that they were struggling with the most had to deal with either depression, anxiety, some kind of mental health issue. I know that there's a lot of stigma out there in regards to the church's role and the relationship between faith and mental health. And, one thing I think is important to, stress is even though youth ministers and DREs and men and women in pastoral ministry, it's a relational ministry, unless you're certified or trained, you shouldn't be offering counseling services. But I guess my big question is, from your experience, both as a Catholic, but also as a professional, in what ways can the church help with some of the mental health issues and just help in general with mental health when it comes to their faithful in the flock and their professionals? What are some best practices we can do? What are some ways that we can, get ahead of it, but also respond to some of the needs that are out there?
Based on whatever ministry you serve in, I think a very basic best practice would be, do you have a list of trusted therapists that you could refer somebody to? So whether it's marriage ministry, youth ministry, do you have a list of therapists that specialize in that group of people that if something comes up and you're meeting with a couple or you're meeting with a teen and something happens, you can just immediately give them that information and pass that on. But I think in addition to that, is there open conversation about mental health? Have you had speakers come in and present or have themed nights to talk about that? Hopefully you're somebody who's willing to be open and discuss your own mental health to model that for other people. So I think there's a lot we can do as far as normalizing and acknowledging that there are other things outside of the spiritual realm that can happen to us. So, for example, if somebody has diabetes, we rally around, we help them, we encourage them to go to the doctor, do whatever you need to do, get that insulin pump, whatever it is, right? And do you need a meal train if something were to happen serious with that person? But with mental health, it's a little bit more tricky because we don't always visibly see those things come out. But really, the truth is, in ministry settings, you probably see more than you realize or that you think. If someone's sharing about a challenge in their life, a hardship, or dealing with a family conflict, or just not feeling themselves, feeling inadequate in some way, there's potential for that to be a mental health concern depending on the situation. Um, and so are we willing to just be open and talk about that and normalize that, just like we would with somebody who needs to go to the eye doctor to get eyeglasses, somebody who needs to check that insulin pump? We don't tell the person with diabetes, oh my gosh, just pray to God more and you don't worry about that insulin pump. How dare you not put your faith in God?
Mm.
And I feel like that can be part of the stigma for us in church circles is, where do I draw the line? Am I really showing my true faith in God or am I not? So I think avoiding over spiritualization, when somebody comes to you with a concern, are we able to talk about the practical elements of that concern rather than offer it up to God? He's going to take care of you. Those are all important things to add as well. But are we skipping over that natural element of the mental, emotional needs? And are we inviting that as part of the conversation as well to make sure that people are getting connected to those resources that they might benefit from?
Well, and I can see there a little bit of the skepticism though, of especially the fear though, if I go see a therapist, are they going to pull me away from my faith? Right. And that's one of the beautiful things about your book is you're bringing your faith into this subject of loneliness, which is highly relevant, but also, using your expertise and everything. So what are some things that we can use to encourage people? Like, no, not every therapist, like I've always heard a good therapist, it doesn't matter what religion or creed you come in believing, because really it's there to listen and help you walk through that. But what are some other things that if we in churches are partnering with different therapists or counseling services or things along those lines, can help people kind of see that faith and therapy have that relationship?
Yeah, I think there's something really nice about working with a therapist who holds a similar worldview. So certainly, I think depending on the context, absolutely you can work with a therapist with a secular worldview. For example, if you need help with ADHD, there's not a lot that's going to be happening in those conversations, hopefully, that somebody's going to encourage you to go against church teaching or something like that. And so depending on the situation, a lot of those things are safe. However, in a marriage context, I think that might be a little more important because you might be talking about sexual intimacy issues. You could be deciding whether or not we should get divorced. And it would be really helpful to have a therapist who believes in the sacrament of marriage, who's going to encourage you and help you to keep that marriage intact rather than somebody who might more quickly say, oh, you guys, this is too much. You just need to get divorced. And so I think it depends again on the context and paying attention to what are those values. Those are all questions you can ask a therapist. What are your views about marriage? What are your views about a particular situation? And then you, as the person working with that therapist, hopefully you can open up and share about your Catholic worldview and your vision. And again, a good therapist is going to respect that. And if they're not going to respect that, then you having that conversation with them about whatever they said that might have crossed the line or made you uncomfortable, and explaining that to them. But again, it's really nice when you can find someone from that worldview who just sort of has those natural understandings of anthropology of the human person created in God's image and likeness, and then just holding some of those similar values. It makes things a lot easier, which is why if you go through that process of having those conversations with therapists, asking them those questions, and then that way you have that list to refer people to, that can be really helpful. So most therapists give some type of consultation call, a 10 or 15-minute call that's free of charge. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable for you as a catechetical leader to reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for a therapist to refer the people I minister to. Would I be able to ask you a few questions and just see how that conversation goes, or meet someone for coffee and see how comfortable you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. And it can be such a powerful resource. I know in my experience, right, there's been plenty of times where a parent or a young person or someone's coming to me dealing with something that I know is way above my pay grade, way too much for me to handle alone, and being able to refer them to several men and women who, not only are very good at their therapy, but hold their Catholic faith belief or the same worldview as you mentioned. Like, I think it's definitely key in that regards, and so good. You mentioned this earlier, and especially when we're talking about loneliness, and with the pandemic happening now 4 years ago, which feels like weird to say, but we're still battling loneliness, right? We're still seeing this. We're seeing it with young people. We're seeing it with older people. It knows no age in that regards. But what are some of the bright spots that you're seeing of how people are, especially through the church, addressing these mental health issues? What are some of the bright spots or things that you're seeing that is definitely bringing you hope, but things that we in catechetical ministry can be aware of and maybe hopefully lead people further to?
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening, believe it or not. I mean, there's so many more people that are open to that, even at my own parish. They've had a series on mental health, a couple parishes in our diocese. They've had series with some mental health professionals where somebody can come and speak about grief or anxiety. Catholic Charities running their own event and teaching a mental health first aid class. So I think there's a lot more awareness of people just knowing that this is an important issue that we need to learn more about. And so I think that is giving me a lot of hope that people are more willing to have the conversation, even if they're not feeling confident in the subject or unsure what to do or say or how to go about it. I think the fact that we're asking the question is huge and will really get us a long way. So I think just being willing to jump in, have those conversations is huge.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a moment to interrupt the show. I know you're having such a great time listening to our conversation, but I wanted to tell you about CP Plus. That's the Church Podcast Premium subscription. I know you're like, well, why do I need to subscribe and pay something for a subscription when I can get it for free? Well, one, you don't have to deal with ads like this. Two, we would love to send you the episode earlier. 3, you would get a discount with 4 Marks Printing, which are the people that make awesome shirts like this one. If you're not watching, but you're listening, just trust me, the shirt is totally cool. It's really awesome. You don't want to miss it. Plus, you get a free subscription to MYM Premium, Marathon Youth Ministries newsletter, where we deliver you resources for you, for your team to help you grow. You support Ministry Training Resource, which is basically an organization that does research that helps us develop the profession of ministry. And you get some really cool producer credits. I mean, what's better than being a podcast producer? Absolutely nothing. So for $6.99 a month, I know it sounds like a lot, but instead of buying that cleaning gel for your car, yeah, I know it exists. Instead, sign up for this Church Podcast Plus, CP Plus. Just go to thechurchpodcast.org, click on the show notes below. Anyway, back to the show. Awesome. Well, Regina, really appreciate this conversation. And now we're coming to the point of the conversation that we do with all of our guests. It's called our Final 5 Questions. Sent you those questions in advance. Hopefully you had time to process and think about them. If not, I'm an external processor if you haven't picked up by now, but we can tackle that together. Are you ready for our Final 5?
Sure. Let's go for it.
So question number 1, in addition to prayer, what is one tangible tool or resource that has helped you be your most productive or better yet healthy self?
So a couple of things. I think as of late, really making sure my phone is nowhere near me when I'm having to engage in concentrated work is definitely a way for me to be more productive. And it's tricky. It's a little bit challenging because my phone, I need it to communicate with the people that I work with, to communicate with my administrative assistant. And so there's things where it's kind of, I need to be relatively nearby. But I've found that even just putting it on a different table, just even 10 feet away, can really make a huge difference. Writing things down also. Having that checklist is huge for me. I'm going to forget. So I'm likely to forget something unless it's written down. So those are my two go-tos usually.
Definitely. And with the phone, do you have like off hours with your phone? Like, I know I've been successful before in the past of just saying, turning off the phone and it's going 3 flights up or, two rooms away, from this time to this time. Has that been helpful too?
Yeah, we don't do that too often, but sometimes my husband and I, we will put the phones away when we really want to make sure we have quality conversation and be engaging with each other. So yeah, it's a little more random, but I wouldn't say they're set times, but definitely we go in that space every now and then.
Now, this question usually we ask, ministry leaders, but we'll cater this more towards leadership or just even therapy. But what is the worst advice you've ever gotten from someone regarding the work that you do?
Oh my goodness. There's been a few things to choose from, but probably one of the worst ones was when somebody suggested that I not work with a certain group of people. And it was really, it was an interesting debate because it was talking about faith and, who should you help, as a Catholic person, right? Should you be available to all people, all walks of life, or should you not, based on church teaching or things like that. And I'm just thinking that, at the end of the day, we need to be available. All people need love and hope and healing. And so even if, an atheist person were to come and meet with me, that I feel like that shouldn't be conditional on them getting the help that they need. So it was an interesting debate. And for me, I feel like really poor advice because, again, we're called to help everyone as Catholics, and not have that condition based on whether or not we should meet with somebody. So,
well, and even though you're not necessarily evangelizing in the traditional way, because that's not what therapy is, you are sharing the love of God by listening to that person. And going back to like loneliness, right? Sometimes the reason we feel isolated or lonely is because we feel ignored. And so
right.
Just being able to share that love, regardless of who they are or what they've done or where they've been, I think is important. And that's something that, I think we can learn from in church ministry, right? Because it's not like we're just catering to Catholics. We're not even catering. We're serving the whole community. Our parish is our physical boundaries, not the church building itself. And so we're going to hopefully encounter all walks of life, all people of different thoughts and beliefs. And I think that is important. So, I can see that being a challenge, definitely in therapy for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you just never know who's going to come across your way. And so, yeah, being open to that, going to those boundaries and those peripheries. Absolutely.
So we know that's bad advice. Now, what advice or encouragement would you give? And actually, from your perspective as a therapist, what's some advice you would give someone who's new to ecclesial ministry, someone new working in the church, starting out in the field to help them succeed and do what God's called them to do?
I would say think about your boundaries now, because once you get pulled into the life of the church, there's a lot of dynamics where it's just very easy to give in a little bit here and there and then find yourself burnt out in 2 to 3 years. And so I would say be really vigilant, from the beginning. And also, I think that's going to help you because when somebody's new to ministry, they're excited. They have all of these ideas and things they want to do. And sometimes it can be hard when you try to put forth a new idea and someone rejects it or explains why those things aren't possible. And so when we're able to have those healthy boundaries in place, that keeps that flame alive, that fire burning, and that excitement going longer, that you can tolerate a little bit of creativity and thinking outside the box. If you have an idea and somebody shoots it down, you're going to be able to fan that flame and still think of ways to kind of get around that, or, make the idea come to life within the expectations and the rules that you're given in your parish or where you're working. So I would say put those boundaries in place immediately so that you can last longer in ministry. We need good people, and we need people who are excited to be there. And if you have those good boundaries in place, that will help you stay one of those people.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, especially for, I know people who are young. I think back to when I started in ministry. I was single, no kids, got in, felt like, I could work to 10 o'clock at night. We were talking about this before, right? And just keep the candle burning at both ends. But it was one of those things of like, okay, I remember someone saying, all right, Chris, what are your days off? And I was like, well, it might be Thursday this week, or it might be Saturday the next week, and everything. They're like, no. There will be some times where you have to work on weekends. There's times where you'll have to work in the evenings, but you have to have that kind of, that default reset where you're like, you know what, every day I have this time and this time off, or, I'm not going to have people, one of the things that I did, which was a helpful boundary, is I took off all of my parish work email off my phone, because it was like one of those things where I knew I was going to check my phone on a Tuesday night or a Saturday morning and see a work email, and would trigger me, even if it was nothing like, annoying. It just would get me to start thinking about work, and therefore I'm not resting and I'm not rebounding in that. So creating those boundaries are definitely helpful. What are some tips, though, someone might have in talking to their pastor about that, about setting boundaries? Because, right, the role of a clergy is very different than the role of or religious is different than a layperson in that regards.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think and it's tough because they're your boss. And so you have that power differential dynamic of one speaking to your boss, but then also speaking to a clergy member. So there's a lot there as far as getting the courage to say something and be honest. But I think being as transparent as possible and just saying, hey, I'm having a really hard time taking days off. I've noticed I take Saturday off sometimes, Thursday sometimes. Is there a way that we can figure out a good day for me for that to be my day? I know here are the ministries I'm involved in, and here's what's happening. And then that way he can help you, he or she, right? If it's a sister, they can help you figure out what works best based on their needs as well. Because we don't want to just immediately show up and say, these are my demands, this is how it's going to be, even though you're my boss. But making sure we're attentive to, because there might be a preferred day or time that they have that they really want you to be present, and they might be willing to be more flexible on some other days. So I think just opening the conversation, starting it, opening the door can be a great way to do that.
Well, and I like how you said that, because I think it is key too, right? You can come in with your boundaries, but they can come off as demands. And if there's not flexibility or dialogue there, you might be setting boundaries that just are unrealistic to that position or that job. And whether you're a priest or just some type of supervisor, you got to be able to, on the other side, right, articulate that of saying, well, I want to respect your boundaries, but I also want you to know this is what the job or the ministry entails. And so let's just make sure we're on the same page in that regards.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have to work within the parameters of our job description and the expectations there.
Definitely. All right. Last question. What is your biggest hope for the church at this time?
There are so many incredible ministries, people doing so many creative things. I'm really excited about social media and what's possible. And I think Bishop Barron has shown us a great example of just engaging people in conversation. I feel like there's so much more to be done in this area. And so it's really hopeful for me to see people trying things out with podcasts or Instagram or whatever it is. And I'm really hopeful about the dialogues that those outlets are creating for people. I'm just excited to see how evangelization is going to look in this period of time. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, Regina, thank you for bringing so many people hope with your therapy, and also for, writing this book, Leaving Loneliness Behind. Of course, you can get it at Ave Maria Press or anywhere books are sold. Regina, if people want to connect with you or learn more about you, where can we send them?
You can go to my website, reginaboyd.com, or you can come find me on Instagram at Boyd Counseling Services. I'm usually there a lot of the time, so you can come find me there.
Awesome. Well, Regina, thank you so much for spending your time with us, and thanks for being on the show. And we'll definitely have to continue this conversation and talk more things about therapy and ministry, because I've got 1,000 more questions, but we're going to run out of time.
Awesome.
But anyway, thanks so much, and thanks for being on the show.
Okay.
This has been a production of Marathon Youth Ministry, the church podcast talking all things ministry, produced by Stephen Herrera and Be Well Creative. Music provided by Loco Joseph. No animals were hurt in the production of this podcast. Please be sure to tip your waiters. See you next time.